The complete history of the United States of America. The history of the United States is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of indigenous civilizations, European colonization, revolutionary idealism, violent expansion, internal conflict, global power, and social transformation. From its pre-colonial roots to its current status as a global superpower, the American story is one of constant change, contradiction, and aspiration. Pre-colonial America, before 1492. For thousands of years before European contact, the Americas were inhabited by diverse and sophisticated societies. In the region that would become the United States, these included complex cultures, the mound-building societies of the Mississippian culture, e.g., Cahokia, the Puebloan peoples of the Southwest, ancestral Puebloans at Chaco Canyon, and the extensive trade networks of tribes across the continent. Estimated population, millions of people, speaking hundreds of languages, lived in varied ecological zones, from hunter-gatherer bands to settled agricultural communities. The colonial era, 1492 to 1763. European arrival. Christopher Columbus's 1492 voyage, sponsored by Spain, initiated the Columbian Exchange, a transformative and often catastrophic transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and people between the Old and New Worlds. Epidemics decimated native populations. Spanish and French outposts. Spain established the first permanent European settlement at St. Augustine, Florida, 1565. France explored the Mississippi River Valley, focusing on the fur trade. English settlements. The first permanent English colony was at Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. The Pilgrims founded Plymouth Colony, 1620, seeking religious freedom. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, 1630, became a Puritan stronghold. Development of distinct regions. 3 distinct colonial societies emerged. 1. New England, small farms, trade, fishing, and religious communalism. 2. The Chesapeake, Virginia/Maryland plantation economies based on tobacco, dependent on indentured servitude and later, chattel slavery. 3. The Southern colonies and Caribbean, rice and indigo plantations reliant on large-scale slave labor from Africa. The Middle Passage, the forced transportation of enslaved Africans became central to the colonial economy, creating a brutal system of racial hierarchy. Conflict and expansion. Colonists expanded westward, leading to frequent wars with Native American nations, e.g., King Philip's War, 1675-76, and among European powers, French and Indian War, 1754-63. Britain's victory in the latter expelled France from mainland North America. The American Revolution and the New Nation, 1763-1789. Causes of revolution. Britain's attempts to tax the colonies to pay for war debts and assert control, Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, Tea Act, met with the slogan, "No taxation without representation." Protests escalated, Boston Tea Party, 1773. War for Independence, 1775-1783. Fighting began at Lexington and Concord. The Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776, authored primarily by Thomas Jefferson, articulating Enlightenment ideals of natural rights and popular sovereignty. With crucial French aid, the Continental Army, led by George Washington, secured victory at Yorktown, 1781. The Articles of Confederation, the first national constitution, 1781, created a weak central government, unable to manage debt or interstate disputes. The Constitutional Convention, 1787. Delegates met in Philadelphia to draft a new framework. The resulting U.S. Constitution established a federal republic with separated powers, executive, legislative, judicial, and a system of checks and balances. It was a bundle of compromises, most notoriously counting enslaved people as 3/5 of a person for representation. Ratification and the Bill of Rights. Federalists, Hamilton, Madison, argued for ratification. Anti-Federalists feared centralized power. To secure support, the promise of a Bill of Rights was made. The first 10 amendments, guaranteeing individual liberties, were ratified in 1791. The early Republic and expansion. 1789 to 1849. Federalist era, George Washington's presidency set precedents. Alexander Hamilton established the financial system. Political parties, Federalists versus Democratic Republicans, emerged. The Louisiana Purchase, 1803. President Thomas Jefferson bought the vast territory from France, doubling the nation's size. The Lewis and Clark Expedition, 1804 to 2006, mapped and explored it. War of 1812, conflict with Britain over trade, impressment, and Western expansion. It solidified U.S. sovereignty and fueled nationalism. The Market Revolution, transportation improvements, canals, railroads, industrialization in the North, and the growth of commercial agriculture transformed the economy. Jacksonian democracy, the presidency of Andrew Jackson, 1829 to 37, expanded white male suffrage but was also marked by the brutal Indian Removal Act, 1830, leading to the Trail of Tears. Manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent justified the annexation of Texas, the Oregon Territory, and, following the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48, the Mexican Cession, California, Southwest. Sectional crisis and Civil War, 1850 to 1865. The slavery debate, as the nation expanded, the question of whether new states would permit slavery intensified sectional division. The Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854, and the Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, 1857, failed to resolve the crisis. Abolitionism and resistance, a growing movement, led by figures like Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, demanded an end to slavery. Enslaved people resisted through rebellion, Nat Turner, escape, the Underground Railroad, and everyday acts of defiance. The election of 1860 and secession, the election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican opposed to slavery's expansion, prompted 7 Southern slave states to secede and form the Confederate States of America. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, the bloodiest conflict in American history. Key turning points included the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, which made ending slavery a war aim, and Union victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, 1863. The Union's industrial capacity and population ultimately prevailed over Confederate military skill. The war ended with General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox in April 1865. Reconstruction and the Gilded Age, 1865 to 1900. Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, the effort to rebuild the South and integrate freed slaves into society. The 13th, abolished slavery, 14th, granted citizenship and equal protection, and 15th, granted black men voting rights. Amendments were passed. Freedmen's Bureau schools were established. However, white Southern resistance through black codes, and the Ku Klux Klan, and Northern political fatigue, led to the Compromise of 1877, which withdrew federal troops and ended Reconstruction. The New South and Jim Crow, Southern states instituted a rigid system of racial segregation, Jim Crow laws, and disenfranchisement, upheld by the Supreme Court in Plessy v. Ferguson, 1896. Westward expansion and Indian Wars, settlement of the West accelerated with the Homestead Act, 1862, and the Transcontinental Railroad, 1869. This resulted in the subjugation of Plains tribes, the destruction of the buffalo, and their forced relocation to reservations, e.g., Battle of Wounded Knee, 1890. The Gilded Age, a period of rapid industrialization, immigration, and immense wealth for robber barons like Rockefeller, oil, and Carnegie, steel. It was also an era of profound social problems, urban slums, child labor, violent labor strikes, Haymarket, Homestead, and political corruption. Progressivism, Empire, and War, 1890 to 1920. The Progressive Era, reformers sought to address the ills of industrialization. Achievements included trust-busting, food and drug regulation, women's suffrage, 19th Amendment, 1920, and the income tax. The Spanish-American War, 1898, marked America's emergence as a global imperial power. The U.S. acquired Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, after a brutal war of suppression. World War I, 1917 to 1918 initially neutral, the U.S. entered the war in 1917 after German submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram. The American Expeditionary Forces helped tip the balance to an Allied victory. President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points and advocacy for the League of Nations were largely rejected by a return to isolationism at home. Boom, bust, and global leadership, 1920 to 1945. The Roaring Twenties, a decade of economic prosperity, consumerism, jazz, and cultural change, coupled with prohibition, nativism, and a resurgence of the KKK. The Great Depression, the stock market crash of 1929 led to a worldwide economic catastrophe. Unemployment reached 25%. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, 1933-39, responded with a vast array of relief, recovery, and reform programs, Social Security, FDIC, WPA, CCC, expanding the federal government's role. World War II, the U.S. remained neutral until the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. America's industrial might and manpower became the arsenal of democracy. Key events included D-Day, 1944, and the Pacific Island hopping campaign. The war ended in the Pacific after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 1945. The Holocaust's horrors were revealed. The Cold War and social upheaval, 1945 to 1980. Origins of the Cold War, a geopolitical and ideological struggle with the Soviet Union emerged. The Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan sought to contain communism in Europe. The affluent society and suburbia, the 1950s saw economic boom, the rise of the middle class, and mass suburbanization, the American dream. The Civil Rights Movement, a monumental struggle to end legal segregation and secure voting rights. Landmark events included the Brown v. Board of Education decision, 1954, the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955-56, the March on Washington, 1963, and the Civil Rights Act, 1964, and Voting Rights Act, 1965. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. advocated nonviolence, while others embraced black power. The Vietnam War, a deeply divisive conflict stemming from Cold War containment policy. Growing anti-war protests and the Tet Offensive, 1968, turned public opinion. The U.S. withdrew in 1973, South Vietnam fell in 1975. Social and cultural revolutions, the 1960s and 70s witnessed the feminist movement, led by figures like Betty Friedan, the environmental movement, Earth Day, EPA, the gay rights movement, Stonewall riots, 1969, and a broader counterculture. Crisis and malaise, the 1970s were marked by the Watergate scandal, leading to President Nixon's resignation, economic stagflation, and the Iran hostage crisis, creating a sense of national disillusionment. The modern era, 1980-present. The Reagan Revolution, Ronald Reagan's presidency, 1981-89, championed conservative values, tax cuts, deregulation, and a massive military buildup that pressured the Soviet Union. End of the Cold War, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, leaving the U.S. as the world's sole superpower. The technology boom, the rise of personal computing and the Internet, Silicon Valley, sparked an economic and social transformation in the 1990s. 9/11 and the War on Terror, the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks led to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Heightened national security measures, U.S.A. Patriot Act, and long-term military engagement. The 2008 financial crisis, a major recession triggered by a housing market collapse, led to a sluggish recovery and increased political polarization. Social changes and ongoing debates, the election of Barack Obama, 2008, as the first black president. The legalization of same-sex marriage, 2015. The rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. Intense political division, debates over immigration, healthcare, climate change, and the role of government. Recent events, the COVID-19 pandemic, 2020, the election of Joe Biden, 2020, the January 6 attack on the U.S. Capitol, 2021, and ongoing cultural and political battles over identity, history, and democracy itself. The 21st Century, Terror, Crisis, and Reckoning, 2001-present. A. The Age of Terror and the Forever Wars. The September 11 attacks, 2001. On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists from the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 commercial airliners. They crashed 2 into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City and 1 into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The 4th plane, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers fought the hijackers. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. The War on Terror and the U.S.A. Patriot Act. The administration of President George W. Bush responded by declaring a global war on terror. Domestically, Congress passed the U.S.A. Patriot Act, 2001, with overwhelming bipartisan support. This law greatly expanded the surveillance and investigative powers of law enforcement and intelligence agencies, allowing for increased monitoring of communications, financial records, and library activity, often with reduced judicial oversight. Critics argued it sacrificed civil liberties for security. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. In October 2001, the U.S. led an invasion of Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban regime harboring Al-Qaeda. In 2003, based on disputed intelligence about weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, the U.S. and a coalition of the willing invaded Iraq, toppling Saddam Hussein's regime. The Iraq War, in particular, became highly controversial as no WMDs were found and a protracted insurgency and sectarian civil war erupted. These conflicts became America's longest wars, lasting 2 decades, costing trillions of dollars, and resulting in hundreds of thousands of casualties. B. Economic collapse and political realignment, 2008 to 2016. The Great Recession, 2007 to 2009. The crisis was triggered by the collapse of a housing bubble fueled by risky subprime mortgages and complex financial derivatives. Major investment bank Lehman Brothers collapsed in September 2008, freezing global credit markets. The result was the worst global financial crisis since the Great Depression. Millions lost homes and jobs, retirement savings were wiped out. Government response. The Bush administration secured a controversial $700 billion Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, to bail out the financial sector. Incoming President Barack Obama signed the $831 billion American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, 2009, to stimulate the economy. The crisis led to lasting public anger toward Wall Street and government, fueling populist movements on both the left, Occupy Wall Street, and the right, the Tea Party. The election of Barack Obama. 2008 Senator Barack Obama of Illinois defeated Senator John McCain, becoming the first African American president in U.S. history. His campaign, built on themes of hope and change, mobilized record turnout, especially among young and minority voters. The Obama presidency. Major achievements included the Affordable Care Act, ACA or Obamacare, 2010, which aimed to expand health insurance coverage. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, 2010, and the operation that killed Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, 2011. However, his presidency faced intense partisan opposition, a rise in racially tinged political rhetoric, and a stagnating recovery that fueled economic anxiety. C. Social transformation and cultural wars. The LGBTQ+ rights revolution. Public opinion shifted rapidly. The Supreme Court ruled in United States v. Windsor, 2013, that the federal government must recognize same-sex marriages, and in Obergefell v. Hodges, 2015, it established a constitutional right to same-sex marriage nationwide. The rise of Black Lives Matter. Founded in 2013 after the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's killer, the movement gained national prominence following the police killings of Michael Brown, Ferguson, 2014, and George Floyd, Minneapolis, 2020. It became a decentralized force advocating against police brutality and systemic racism, sparking global protests and intense debates over policing, monuments, and historical memory. The Me Too movement went viral in 2017, exposing pervasive sexual harassment and assault, toppling powerful figures in entertainment, media, and politics, and forcing a national conversation about power, gender, and accountability. The Trump era and Democratic crisis, 2016 to 2020. The election of Donald Trump, 2016. Political outsider and businessman Donald J. Trump, running on a platform of America First, nationalist populism, immigration restriction, and economic protectionism, defeated Democrat Hillary Clinton in a stunning electoral college victory, despite losing the popular vote. His presidency was defined by norm-breaking rhetoric, hardline immigration policies, travel bans, family separation, tax cuts, deregulation, and intense conflict with the media and political institutions. Deepening polarization, the political climate grew increasingly tribal and hostile. Key issues like immigration, the border wall, healthcare, and Supreme Court appointments, the contentious confirmations of Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, became flashpoints. The COVID-19 pandemic, 2020. The novel coronavirus pandemic caused a massive public health and economic crisis. The U.S. response became politicized, with disputes over lockdowns, mask mandates, and vaccine development. Over 1 million Americans died by 2023, and the economy plunged into a sharp, if temporary, recession. The 2020 election and aftermath, Joe Biden defeated incumbent Trump, becoming the oldest president ever elected. Trump refused to concede, alleging widespread voter fraud without evidence. This big lie set the stage for a constitutional crisis. The January 6 insurrection and its aftermath, 2021. On January 6, 2021, as Congress met to formally certify the Electoral College results, a mob of President Trump supporters, believing the election had been stolen, stormed the U.S. Capitol. They breached the building, vandalized offices, and violently clashed with police, temporarily halting the certification process. 5 people died. The event was a direct attack on the peaceful transfer of power, shocking the nation and the world. A subsequent House Select Committee investigation concluded that Trump was central to a multi-part conspiracy to overturn the election. The Biden presidency and ongoing struggles, 2021-present. President Joe Biden took office pledging to restore the soul of America, combat the pandemic, and rebuild the economy. Major legislation included the American Rescue Plan Act, COVID relief, a bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, climate, healthcare, taxes. The Supreme Court's conservative majority issued landmark rulings, most notably Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, 2022, which overturned Roe v. Wade and eliminated the federal constitutional right to abortion. Returning the issue to state legislatures and igniting a new political firestorm. Enduring divides, the nation remains deeply split along partisan, racial, and cultural lines. Core debates rage over the role of government, federal power versus states' rights. Economic inequality, wages, corporate power, and the social safety net. Identity and history, critical race theory, LGBTQ+ rights, especially transgender rights, and how to teach America's past. Electoral integrity, widespread distrust in institutions, fueled by disinformation. Global role, the U.S. faces challenges from a rising China, the war in Ukraine, and climate change. Conclusion, an unfinished project. The history of the United States is the story of an audacious experiment in self-government. It is a narrative of breathtaking innovation, expansion, and the aspirational pursuit of liberty, juxtaposed with the original sins of conquest and slavery whose legacies endure. It is a history of conflict, between empire and republic, state and federal authority, capital and labor, tradition and progress. As the nation moves forward, it continues to grapple with the fundamental question posed at its founding: can a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to equality truly become a just and unified society for all its people? The American story remains unfinished, its next chapters yet to be written by the choices of its citizens. Start with a final summary or engaging question. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into the complete history of the United States. From its indigenous roots to its current status as a global power, it's a story of constant evolution, conflict, and the ongoing struggle to define itself. If this journey through history was valuable for you, here's how you can support this channel and help others discover it. 1. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is the single best way to make sure you never miss a new chapter of history from us. 2. Like this video. It tells the algorithm you enjoyed it and helps share this knowledge with more curious minds. 3. Share it. Know a friend, student, or history buff who would find this useful. Send it to them. Share it in your group chats or on your social media. Engage with the audience and tease future content. Now, I want to hear from you. What period of American history fascinates you the most? The founding era? The Civil War? The Cold War? Or the complex modern age? Drop your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future deep dives in the comments below. I read every single one. Final sign off. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and take care.